welcome back to Oceans Live. I am your host, Kate Thompson, with NOAA's Office of National Marine Sanctuaries, coming to you live from the tip of Cape Cod in Provincetown, Massachusetts, for the 38th voyage of the Charles W. Morgan. The Morgan is the world's only surviving wooden whale ship, and she's sailing around the world, around New England's historic whaling ports this summer for the first time in nearly a century. We're here at the Pilgrim Monument and Provincetown Museum with our continuing coverage of this restored former whale ship's historic journey to Stellwagen Bank National Marine Sanctuary, where whales were once hunted to almost extinction, but now draw millions of tourists on whale-watching boats every year. The Charles W. Morgan's 38th voyage is brought to you by Mystic Seaport, home of the nation's leading maritime museum. Visit them online at www.mysticseaport.org. Hello again to everyone who's watching our broadcast at remote viewing sites across the country, including the Mariners Museum in Newport News, Virginia, Mystic Seaport in Mystic, Connecticut, the Thunder Bay National Marine Sanctuary in Alpena, Michigan, and the Moku Papapa Discovery Center in Hilo, Hawaii. Thank you all for tuning in, and we hope you're enjoying the shows. For those of you watching on www.oceanslive.org, send us your questions through the chat function, and we will do our best to answer them at the end of each show. We've reached the halfway point of our 3-day Whaling to Watching series here on OceansLIVE.org, but there's plenty more special guests and exclusive live footage to come today and tomorrow at 10 a.m., noon, and 2 p.m. Eastern. Before we get to today's show, let's go out to Matt Lawrence on the historic fishing vessel Rowan, which is out on the water escorting the Charles W. Morgan as she makes her way towards Stellwagen Bank National Marine Sanctuary. I hear the whales are putting on quite a show out there, Matt.
Kate, it is unbelievable out here. There are at least 6 humpback whales surrounding us. They've been moving alongside the Morgan, feeding. It is gorgeous.
Oh,
Bright
so exciting.
sun.
It's beautiful out there.
You got it. We have the NOAA research vessel Auk in the vicinity here, taking folks to watch this as well as the other fleets. And even better, one of the Morgan's whale boats has been launched, only the second time since whaling ceased.
Very, very cool. So did the whale boats come close, or did the whales swim up near the whale boats, or did they stay quite off of them?
Oh, it was amazing. The whaleboat was paralleling Charles W. Morgan, and all of a sudden, there a whale appeared.
Very cool. So what type of whales are out there right now?
Oh, we're seeing humpback whales here. It's all of them. They're putting on quite a show, feeding, fluke slapping. It's really neat.
Very cool. So during her 80-year career as a whaling ship, the Morgan was a determined hunter that crisscrossed the globe in search of her prey. The combined effort of the global whaling industry took a tremendous toll on whale populations around the world, but not every danger to whales came from the tip of a harpoon. Even today, nearly 30 years after commercial whaling was banned, whales continue to face threats from people. Less directly maybe, but still potentially devastating. Joining me now in the studio are some folks who are working to reduce these threats to the endangered whales. First, we have David Mattila, NOAA's representative to the International Whaling Commission. Dr. Mattila, thank you so much for being in studio with us today.
Well,
we're really excited for you to be here. Also joining me is Scott Landry, Director of the Whale Disentanglement Program at the Center for Coastal Studies here in Provincetown. Thanks, Scott, for being here as well. Really excited to chat with you both about some of the most important things that are going out there to protect these special gentle giants that we have offshore here. But later, we will also be chatting with Dr. David Wiley, Research Coordinator at the Stellwagen Bank National Marine Sanctuary. But he'll be a little later in the show. But Scott, Dave, let's go ahead and start with the both of you. How about that view out there? Is that amazing or what?
It is pretty amazing. It's a very nice day. We should be out there.
Yeah, not here in studio. Matt, we want to be out there with you. But so, Scott, you've been leading efforts to disentangle whales for several years out the Center for Coastal Studies. Can you tell us a little bit about how the whales get entangled in fishing gear and how it causes problems for them? Because, I mean, after all, you know, these animals are so big that getting caught on a little bit of rope wouldn't be that big of a deal, right?
Yeah, you wouldn't think so. The humpbacks that they're watching right now are about 40-ton animals. Very, very big. Unfortunately, wherever fishing gear and whales overlap, there's a very high risk that whales and sea turtles are going to get caught in this gear. Now that gear is made basically of rope, very, very durable rope that lasts for a long time. And once that gets wrapped around their body, if the whale is still growing, for example, that rope will grow into their body. And so whales face a very long and painful death if they do become entangled. So our team is basically on call right now. If they find an entangled whale alongside the Morgan, we'll be heading out on our boat. So I'll leave you right as we get the call. And we'll head out there to try to help the animal.
So what can you do to help an entangled whale? I mean, they're so large. It's got to be frightening to even come close to them.
They are very, very large. It's very overwhelming. What people tend to forget is that they're also wild animals. They do not like to be approached by people. They tend to be quite frightened, and also realize that entangled animals are often in a lot of pain. And so the work that we do is trying to harness that pain, in a sense, to slow the whale and keep it at the surface. Unfortunately, whales can dive a lot longer than we can. We never enter the water with an entangled animal, simply because if we get entangled in the gear that the whale is entangled in, and they head down for a 20-minute dive, we're never going to make it.
So we saw a whale boat out there earlier in the live shot. Do you use any of the same techniques that the whalers themselves do? I mean, your boats actually look kind of a little bit like the whale boats that they use.
Yeah, it's actually a lot of the similar theory. For example, yesterday we did a training exercise alongside the Morgan. And what we did is deployed a small inflatable boat, which is the equivalent of the Morgan's whale boat. That small inflatable boat allows us to work very closely alongside the whale. And the techniques that we use are actually quite similar. Now, we don't use harpoons. We use a grappling hook that's thrown into the gear that's wrapped around the whale's body. Now, from that grappling hook is a long rope, and on that rope we can attach very large buoys. Whalers might have used kegs back in the day. We use modern buoys, and that's what keeps the whale from diving, slows it down, and keeps it at the surface where we can work on it.
It's amazing. Do you think that they know that you're trying to help them?
No, I don't think they do. Oftentimes you will, that's a very common question that we get, and people do assume that the whales know we're trying to help them, that they'll thank us when we're done. That's really never the case. What we do sometimes see is an animal that has been entangled so long, they're often in shock. And an animal who's in shock behaves very abnormally. And so animals like that could appear to you as though they're staying with you to say thank you, but in reality, it's just a very ill animal.
So Dave, you were one of the pioneers of this disentanglement work. How'd you come up with the tools and techniques to safely do what seems like such dangerous work?
What is that? Necessity is the mother. But actually, I had a little bit of a history as a fisherman for a while before I started working with whales, and so I had some familiarity with some of the tools that they use. And one of our scientists, Stormy, I think you interviewed him yesterday. His father had fished for large animals, tuna and that whatnot, and so he gave us some ideas, and we came up, slowly developed these techniques to try to do this safely, or as safely as possible.
Well, Dr. Dave Wiley is on the show later. We saw some of the tags yesterday in our show that they use with the big poles and everything. It's kind of strange. They look an awful lot like harpoons, and some of the same kind of techniques that were used to do both tagging and disentanglement work look a lot like that. When you came up with the technique, how did you go about doing that with the tools themselves? Well,
basically, as Scott said, we realized that if we could get attached to the rope on the whale, then we could attach floats. The fishermen used to use kegs, or in the old days, logs, or even the boat itself. And in fact, sometimes we'll get towed around by the in the inflatable boat. But all of that is just to try to keep the whale at the surface, slow it down, and get a little bit of control. You can never completely control, but you get a little bit, and then you see what you have to deal with and try to get it all off of the whale.
Yeah, Scott was just saying that he's on call right now. How many whales are disentangled each year, and how many do you think are out there entangled, but we just don't see them?
Well, actually, the number that's disentangled is a small percentage, very small percentage of what is actually happening, and the numbers of reports are a small percentage. We now know from the science of looking at the wounds and the scars on whales that this is happening globally, and it's happening where, as Scott said, wherever whales and man-made rope and net overlap in the ocean, and we think. The current estimates are, it could very well be that several thousand whales die every year from entanglement globally.
Wow. Is disentanglement in
It's
itself
not
enough?
No, it's not the answer. And fortunately, most people realize that the real answer is prevention. Disentanglement is a kind of a immediate Band-Aid to put on the issue until we can figure out how to prevent.
Right. So earlier we saw. We've got some serious whales on the Morgan.
Oh.
Let's go out to the Morgan right now and check out these whales. Matt.
Oh, we
Show
are
us what
being
we got.
treated to a show here. This is unbelievable here. As we're moving alongside the Morgan, a humpback whale just came up, and now it's blowing a bubble cloud here to feed. We are being treated to an amazing show here. Look at all of those bubbles being blown.
Wow, look at that. Jeez, that's amazing. It's like they're saying hi. Yeah, they're eating.
Can you describe what they're doing?
That is amazing.
Please
Tell
describe
us what they're doing, Matt.
Now the whale has taken a big mouthful of water, hopefully full of prey, and it is now squeezing that water out of its mouth through the baleen, and hopefully it will have a nice lunch.
Very, very cool. So, gentlemen, we're watching this. You see this every day when you go out to disentangle. Do you see, I mean, what is he doing right now? What is he eating?
Well, it's likely a she. There's a mother and calf here together. Mom is feeding, and this is how kids are going to learn how to feed, basically. You can see the calf is watching.
Very cool.
And
Very cool.
if mom raises her flukes, like this calf is doing right now,
Right.
we'll see who this whale is. And this very well could be a whale that we've disentangled sometime in the last 30 years.
Right. Yesterday we were talking
It's
to
a
someone
prime
in the
lens,
studio
bud.
who actually was showing the difference in how you could tell who the whales were. But that's
Exactly.
really cool. Matt, what were you going to say?
Oh no, the whales have just dove right now, and so we're waiting to see where they're going to reappear.
Also, with those kind of bubbles, usually that means the prey is most likely sand lance, but Dave can tell you a lot more about that in a little bit, I think, from his research work.
His specific research. Oh, there's the whale boat. What a great shot between the Morgan and the whale boat going out, and the whales coming to say to eat and show their babies how to eat. Very cool. That's with the fact that there's all these ships around them. They're just so. Actually, in saying that, and Dave's actually going to tell us a lot about his research and what's going on out there when it comes to the issues with the shipping, because this is such a busy shipping area in and out of Boston, and you know they were just in between two ships. Did they not care about that kind of thing? Did they hear them, or what's the
Well, I
sense?
think Dave and Layla can probably answer that better, but it seems that if they're busy trying to eat, they have to be pretty focused on that, so they may miss something that's happening around them that could be a threat, like a ship coming quickly. Also, ships, the sound they put out is not uniform, and they may react. There's often a dead or quiet zone in front, and so it's a complicated issue, but the only thing we know right now to do is to keep whales and ships separated as possible, and if we can't do that, then to try to get vessels to slow down.
Well, yesterday we were showing animation of all the whale tracks across the globe. It was amazing, and it was just a little snapshot of the Charles W. Morgan from, I think it was 1830, from when time it was built, to like 1860. So that wasn't even its entire sailing time. It was like black across the globe. This one ship, one whaling ship, it was amazing, the crisscrosses across the globe. So in saying that, how do we address this international issue? I mean, there were whaling ships from all over the place, and today we have obviously shipping going on across the world and the globe. How can we address this international issue?
Well, you mentioned that I'm currently on loan from the U.S. government and NOAA to the International Whaling Commission, and that is an international treaty about the conservation and management of whales. And there are 88 countries that have signed that, and we just held, I just helped to convene a workshop on ship strikes at the Panama Canal just 2 weeks ago, and that there are a lot of, we've tried to bring the most recent and relevant science to that workshop, much of it from Stellwagen Bank, actually, from Dave's work, and try to reach some international agreements and recommendations on actions. And some of those things may be, like we said, to try to separate shipping lanes from high-density whale areas.
Okay. Well, some of the different things that global issues that can affect whales are like oil spills, noise pollution, rising ocean temperatures and ocean acidification. How do you think these will affect the futures of whales in our ocean, Scott?
I think you're right to point out that the threats are very diverse. And certainly, even in the time of whaling, there were other threats besides whaling. And it's going to be very hard for us to predict things like how climate change is going to change the interaction between whales and fishing gear, for example, or even shipping routes that are changed. So it's going to be very difficult for us to predict. And what we want to try to do is find solutions to some of these problems so we can chip away at it.
Right.
And hopefully stabilize populations.
Right.
We don't have a lot of whales left in many of these areas. We have 500 right whales left in the Gulf of Maine, maybe 1,000 humpback whales left in the Gulf of Maine. We're not working with a giant population that has a lot of wiggle room for any risk.
Okay, so it was funny, one of the things I mentioned was oil spills.
Yeah.
Ironic, isn't it, that petroleum oil spills will affect whales when we were hunting whales for the oil that they provided.
And in a
It's
way,
kind of a
the
strange
whales,
weirdness, isn't
the
it?
whales were
They
saved by
benefited, yeah,
petroleum.
they were saved by petroleum.
The only thing that stopped whaling really was petroleum.
Right. We were at the Nantucket Whaling Museum the other day, and they were telling us about the sperm whale that had washed up on shore in Nantucket. I think it was 1998, and they were given permission by the National Marine Fisheries Service to go ahead and dissect the whale and get everything, and they had collected the spermaceti in its head, and they said, yeah, we just opened it up expecting to be able to catch it really easily, and she's like, we had to put an entire rubber raft underneath the whale, and it still spilled over the side. And so I was just like, it's kind of strange, oil spills affecting whales, but yet the entire oil
is what they were
head of a
going
whale
after.
was going, what they were going over.
But
oh, very cool.
Scott's right about the climate change. We just had a couple papers brought to the scientific committee at the IWC about how the sea ice, the Arctic ice, is retreating,
Right.
and fishing gear and shipping is moving up into the Arctic, and now bowhead whales are showing up with entanglements at almost the same kinds of rates as some of their more southern relatives. So it's it's a changing times and hard to predict.
Right. So, well, I hear there's some pretty cool stuff going out on the Rowan. So thank you both for chatting with me today. And the work you do is truly amazing. And I'm inspired by some of the things that you do to help the gentle giants out there off the Cape. So now, entanglement in fishing gear isn't the only danger whales face as they move through the ocean. The ocean is getting more and more crowded these days, and busy shipping lanes often intersect with areas frequented by whales, sometimes with deadly consequences. Before we get to our next guest, though, let's go back out to Matthew Lawrence on board the Rowan. Matt, let's see all the amazing stuff that's going on. I hear that the Stellwagen Bank National Marine Sanctuary research vessel, the Auk, which Dr. Dave Wiley and others use often to go out there and do some amazing research work, is right next to the Morgan out there. Guys, do we have a live shot to go out to?
Kate, go to the live video. There is a humpback whale right next to the research vessel Auk and the Morgan's whale boat.
Check that out. Very cool. Check that out. Oh my gosh. That's amazing.
We've just been sitting around out here, not moving very much, and the whales have just been circling all of the vessels in this area, just feeding and putting on an amazing show.
Look at that. So Dave, since you're still here with us, why is it going up so close? I mean, is it just hanging out to hang out, or is it still feeding, or what's going on?
It's hard to say, but humpback whales are one of the more curious species. They will get curious about boats sometimes if you're just drifting like that, and but people tend to anthropomorphize a bit and think, oh, they're coming over to look at me, waving at me. But I've seen them do this to icebergs in Greenland and to rafts of kelp. You can see, boy, that whale going right past the whaleboat.
Wow, that's amazing.
Oh, it looks like they are. They may be curious there. They're kind of.
I think they're curious. Oh, and we're lucky. Dr. Dave Wiley's getting in here with us. We might just have to have him tell us what's going on out here.
Hopefully they're not some of the older ones and have any memory of whaleboats.
Matt, what's it like seeing this up close and personal?
This is a sight that I didn't think I would ever see. Here we have two humpbacks, probably that mother and calf we saw earlier. They're just swimming around looking at everyone.
That is amazing. How come you drew the straw to be on board the ship today? I'm mad.
I am very, very lucky. This is unbelievable.
Stand back down, mate.
Very cool, very cool. So Dave, there's a mother and her care calf out there. Why are they circling around the ships, do you think?
Not me. As David was saying, if they're done feeding, then they got time on their hands, and they are really curious animals. We'll see them playing with kelp and all sorts of things that are lying on the surface. Matter of fact, they have a hard time swimming by kelp without going and playing with it. So they may certainly just be checking these guys out.
Yesterday we had some people on that were talking about behavioral research with the whales.
They're going to be on the other side of the row.
We're kind of just curious as to what the whalers thought. I mean, they actually would track the behavior of whales themselves to be able to stay close, like with the right whale, and how she always sticks with her calf if something's going to happen, and that they use that to be able to whale with the right whales. It's just interesting how they are intelligent creatures. They really are, and that we thought of them as fish back then, and that they could be exploited and used for our own purposes. But they really are, as more intelligent probably than we are when it comes to so many things. And can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, they're more intelligent when it comes to being a whale than we are.
Yeah,
for sure.
right, for sure.
and fish, fish are pretty interesting in their behavior as well. I think that often people that are directly involved with animals, whether they're hunting or researching, whatever they're doing, they spend a lot of time and they get really good information about what those animals are doing that the rest of the world just isn't privy to. So, whatever your goal is, spending a lot of time with animals makes you understand a lot more of what they're doing in a variety of contexts.
So Dave, Stellwagen Bank National Marine Sanctuary is known as an important summer feeding ground for obviously amazing reasons right here. I mean, they're feeding out there right now. Can you tell us why this is such an amazing place for them to come to?
The sanctuary has been an amazing place way before it was a sanctuary. One of the things that attracted people to New England really was the area of Stellwagen Bank because it was such a rich feeding ground. And that really has to do with the shape of the bottom of this area. There's a glacial deposit, which is Stellwagen Bank, that forms this big underwater hill. And currents that are running along that underwater hill get turned upwards in what are called upwellings. And that kind of brings fertilizer from the bottom back to the surface and starts this whole food web of productivity that ends up with fish and whales and seabirds and everything that you're seeing out there. But it really has to do with the bottom topography more than anything else.
So there's two specific whales that come into this area from what I've heard, the humpback whale and the northern Atlantic right whale. Of the two, which one is more endangered?
Oh, by far, North Atlantic right whales are more endangered. I think as Scott was saying earlier, the population estimate is now about 500 to 550 animals. That's very small. There's more people probably listening to this program than there are right whales on the planet. So humpback whales in this area are doing better, maybe 1,000 in the Gulf of Maine. Worldwide, I don't know, what do you think the worldwide population is? It probably isn't much of an estimate, but.
I think the current estimate for the whole North Atlantic is around 11,000, and for the North Pacific about 21,000, and then you've got the South Pacific, and they're pretty booming around Australia right now, and coming back around Africa as well.
Yeah. The nice thing about humpback whales is they're amazing generalists in their feeding. So they can feed on a lot of different prey types and have all these really cool adaptations and strategies for catching prey that a lot of the other species don't have. So I think one of the things that makes humpback whales successful and makes them in all oceans is this really plastic type of behavior they can do. They can change their behavior to fit particular areas and particular food sources, whether it's by blowing bubbles around prey, working together cooperatively along the bottom, and we've found that they make particular calls to communicate with each other, particular behaviors that they're trying to engage in. So I think, if you're looking at animals that are cognitively complex, humpback whales would be way up there.
Way up there.
Yeah.
So can you tell us a little bit about the research that you're doing? We touched on it yesterday when you were luckily out on board the Morgan and some of the tagging that you do. But can you tell us a smidge about, because you were talking about how they feed and using the bubble nets, and we had talked about aerial shots yesterday and being able to see them better and to be able to tell what their behaviors are. But what do the tags do? How do they tell that story?
Yeah, the tags, we have a couple different tags we use. The D tag, which is the one that we're using predominantly, is a great little thing that's about that big. It attaches to the animals by a suction cup, so it's totally benign. And then it creates a whole suite of data ranging from the depth the animals are, are they rolling? What is the pitch? What is the angle that they're moving at? Fluke strokes moving along. Okay, I guess here we are putting on one of these D-tags. The D-tag is at the end of that long pole. They're going to pop it onto the animal's back. And once it's there, it gives you this suite of data, and it collects data 50,000 times a second. Wow. So huge amounts of data collected. It also records any animal sounds that are being made and any sounds the animals are hearing. So it gives us this great detailed look at what the animals are doing at a very fine scale. The tag only stays on for maybe 20 hours maximum, because at that point it's filled up its memory. Right. So it's collecting huge amounts of data in a very short period of time. It gives us a very fine scale look at what the animals are doing during that period. Mm-hmm. So for instance, the animal that, is this something live here that we're looking at, or?
No, that's, guys, can we show a shot of the Rowan right now? Because I guess there's some stuff going on.
I think that is.
So this animal is bubble netting, possibly. I didn't really see the first of it. There's two main behaviors that they're using here. Was it doing lobtailing, David, or just?
I didn't see the kick, but it looks like it does look like a cloud, not a net. Right.
Right. So they have a couple of different strategies. One, which used to be what we saw here predominantly back when Dave and I first started, was bubble clouding. Yeah. And they just make this big, massive clouds in this big area that would just come to the surface and evidently somehow keep the fish in place. But we'd always heard in Alaska that they were making these bubble nets, rings of bubbles, and we really didn't see that. So you can see a bubble net right there. But for a long time, we didn't see bubble netting in this area, and then it became more and more prevalent. And now we see more bubble netting than bubble clouding, really.
I remember when it was so rare, there were only two animals that we knew were the ones that did the nets, but then the others learned from that, apparently.
Right. And that seems to be a cultural transmission, that they learn from each other, and not just mothers learning or calves learning from mothers, but the whole population learning from each other.
Right. Well, when you put the tag on, I believe you have an animation I've seen of the research that created from the data animation, where you tag it and it goes down, and you can create this animation of what the whale actually does with the track lines.
Right, right. Colin Ware, who's at the University of New Hampshire, is part of our team, and he's a data visualization expert, and he writes textbooks on data visualization. And we were lucky enough to get him to be part of our team, and he's invented whole new ways of looking at tag data. One is TrackPlot, I'm not sure if you guys are showing that, and the other is GeoZooey 4D. GeoZooey 4D creates kind of a virtual whale. TrackPlot is what we actually like better for research, because it gives the whole record of the animal that you can look at at one space and time. Right. So you can look at this ribbon track and say, well, here's what the animal did at point X, and this is everything that happened before that and everything that happened after that. So it gives us a really great way, finally, of looking at animals. Yeah, there's a nice look at an animal blowing a bubble net. Oh, actually, let's see if these blowing a bubble net are doing what we call double loop or kick feeding. So there's two basic styles that they have. One is they just blow a spiral as they're moving upwards. They're blowing bubbles out of their blowhole, and they spiral up and kind of get closer and closer in smaller circles. It kind of constricts the prey. The other is they first blow a bubble ring and then come to the surface, and they slap their tail onto the surface, and then they just duck down and come up and scoop the fish in. What's interesting about that is we had watched it for years at the surface and watched them do this kick and assumed then they were going down and blow the bubbles. But what really happens is they've already blown the bubbles in a circle, and then they come up and do the kick. So it's beautifully timed, and then they come up to it and grab the sand lance.
And 20 years ago, they didn't used to do the kick. They just blew bubbles. But then one or two started kicking, and the rest of them caught on.
And as he was saying at the bubble netting, there was a couple animals that kicked feed, and you could see them way in the distance, and you know exactly who it was, because they're the only ones that actually had that behavior.
So I hear that they also steal from each other. Like one of them does the work to do the bubble net, and the other one comes in and snatches from them.
There's some, it looks like we have evidence in the tag data.
We prefer to think it's cooperation.
Cooperation, right. Well, yeah, we do that in the human world too, right?
Well, it seems that they do both. Some of them will work together and blow nets that they actually work jointly on, and others will come in and raid those nets. Yeah. So they're quite complex in how they behave, as you would expect from an animal with some degree of intelligence.
Well, with our shot earlier, we saw the Morgan, we saw a big yacht, we saw a schooner, we saw a couple, the research vessel. I mean, that was just our little area. There's so many ships in this area. I mean, Boston is one of the busiest harbors that we have in the United States. Can you tell us a smidge about the work that you've done with the northern Atlantic right whale to try to move the shipping lanes to create less ship strikes?
Sure. When we plotted out along the eastern seaboard where ship strikes were occurring, it seemed that the data showed that a lot of them were occurring right around the Stellwagen Bank National Marine Sanctuary. So it's not a really great thing for a National Marine Sanctuary to be known for as a hot spot for whale strikes. So we decided we'd really try to do some research to mitigate that issue. So using a lot of the data from whale watching boats as well as our tag data, we looked at where whales were occurring and then where ships were occurring. Now we have a traffic separation scheme that goes right through the sanctuary, and when we plotted all these data together, it turned out that that traffic separation scheme went right through the heart of whale concentrations.
So this shot that's up here right now is just showing how the shipping lane was moved based on your data, but what are all the dots?
Well, it's a whole bunch of people's data.
Yeah.
So this is data that's coming from when David was here at the Center for Coastal Studies, from the Whale Center of New England. This particular map was made by Mike Thompson, who's the geographer at the sanctuary. And the red color is where lots of whales are. And then the yellow is less whales, dark blue is fewer whales, and light blue is fewer whales after that. So you can see where the red are is where most of the whales are. Then the dots on top of that are North Atlantic right whale sightings, because those are the ones that we're concerned about all whales, but certainly North Atlantic right whales in particular because they're so rare. And per capita wise, they get hit more than any other species for some reason, and we think we know why. We can talk about that later.
Right.
But so what we did is we moved the shipping lanes from going through the areas with lots of whales to going through an area that had far fewer whales in terms of historic whale sightings.
Well, I'm sure moving the shipping lane probably wasn't as easy as that map made it sound. How many years were you working with the shipping companies to get that to happen?
Yeah, the shipping companies are actually great to work with. And because we didn't come and tell them what they had to do, we came to them with data. And we said, we've got a problem, we've got a lot of data, let's look at this together. And so for about 6 months, Mike Thompson and I would go every month up to the what's called the Boston Port Operators Group meetings. And we'd look at the data with them, we'd come up with some ideas, they'd have some more questions, Mike and I would go back and work up the data again. And after the end of that 6 months, we'd pretty much come to an agreement of where we thought the lane should be moved to.
That's that shot up we got right now. Is that shipping tracks that goes in and out of Boston?
Yep, that's I think just about 2 months of data for shipping tracks.
2 months, that's it. Jeez.
Right. So you can see that
Red.
although there's shipping everywhere, if you look at it a little bit differently and over a longer period of time, really the majority of it is going right through the shipping lanes, which makes sense. And also the fastest ships are going through the shipping lanes. So that was where the greatest threat was, and because they went through the heart of where the whale aggregations tended to occur, moving it seemed to be a good idea.
Right.
But it was, I think, about a 3-year process to actually get the whole thing
Well,
done.
you mentioned about the 3-year process because this is obviously happening not only in Boston, but we've got LA and Seattle and other large ports where whales are there as well. I mean, we have our other sanctuary, the Channel Islands National Marine Sanctuary. I think that they've been trying to work on this exact same issue
Absolutely.
as well.
Right.
So has this process of developing safer shipping lanes been adopted anywhere else in the world?
Sure. As a matter of fact, it was first done in the Bay of Fundy, Canada, for North Atlantic right whales, using a very similar type of data source, sightings of animals, and then looking at where they tended to occur and where the shipping tended to occur, and see how to reduce that co-occurrence. I think as David was saying earlier about, and Scott, it's the same thing with shipping as it is with fishing gear. Where they co-occur, you're going to get interactions. So the easiest thing, is to try to reduce the co-occurrence. If you can't do that, then you try to come up with ways fishing gear to make the fishing gear a little more benign. In terms of shipping, you try to have the ships go slower so that the collision will have less lethal impact on the animals, and maybe give the animals more time to escape.
How about I heard about another project that had to do with it was report cards for the shipping industry, or specific ships, or how does that work?
Yeah, that's a project we have at the National Marine Sanctuary, Stellwagen Bank, in joint project with the International Fund for Animal Welfare, IFAW. And because there is a ship strike rule, NOAA has a rule that says that ships have to go slow in particular areas at particular times to protect North Atlantic right whales. So because we have a good way of looking at ship traffic called AIS, Automatic Identification System. So this is a system where boats that are going anywhere in the ocean have a transponder on them that's sending out information about their name, how fast they're going, where they are. So in the sanctuary, we built a series of receivers to collect that information. And so we know where the ships are going and how fast they're traveling. So we can look at these times when they're supposed to go slow, called seasonal management areas, and track their speed through those areas. So we do that now for every ship that goes through one of these areas and send them a map of their transits, how fast they were going, whether they were complying or not. So we call it their report card, and we send it to all the companies. We've been averaging about 250 letters a year to companies, and we've been getting some really interesting responses and success from those report cards.
Well, good.
Yeah.
Well, good. I wonder what the people that get D's say. Or they don't respond, probably.
Some of them do, yeah. Some of them are questioning the data, and then we explain to them where the data are, how we're getting the data, and how we're treating the data.
Right.
And then they usually say, okay, well, we've made our captains more aware of it, and they will be complying in the future.
Yeah, so I also, in this digital day and age of technology and apps and phones and iPads and all these things, I've heard you created a pretty awesome app that helps in this process.
Yeah, we created an app called Whale Alert, and again, when I say we, this is a very large team of we. Not only the scientists at the Stellwagen Bank Sanctuary, but also International Fund for Animal Welfare, University of New Hampshire, people at Google, all sorts of different teammates involved with that particular project. And there you have your Whale Alert right there on the screen. You can actually get Whale Alert for yourself. If you go to the iTunes store, you can download it for your iPad or your iPhone, and it gives all the current regulatory information that a shipper needs to be able to comply with for the North Atlantic right whale ship strike rule.
Very cool. So is that what we would see on our iPad?
Yeah.
If we downloaded it?
On a particular day, that's what you would see.
Okay.
So you can see there's lots of things that shippers need to know, and how they were supposed to know all this stuff was beyond anybody's real grasp, including the shippers.
Right.
So by providing this, they can actually see where their ship is on the iPad, because it's got a GPS locator in it, and they can see where their ship is relative to all these different management areas that they're supposed to be cognizant of and changing their behavior relative to.
Perfect. Well, thank you, gentlemen. Oh, were you going to add
I was
something?
just going to say, David, I've been talking about that as a possible tool for the rest of the world, at least in certain other hotspots around the world, in Mediterranean and Panama and those kind of things. So we'll see. Maybe that'll be used elsewhere.
It's got potential. Certainly one of the goals for us with the Stellwagen Bank Sanctuary is to pilot innovative research and management techniques, and then hopefully export them. So certainly Whale Alert is now being exported to the West Coast for work in the other sanctuaries out there. And as David said, it's got good applications for Panama, the Mediterranean, New Zealand. So any place that they're having ships and whales together, it could certainly help.
Right. Well, I hear we have whale feeding right now. The shot off of the Rowan. Can we quickly see some of the exciting shots off the Rowan real quick? Look at that. Very nice. So, gentlemen, thank you so much. We'll just stay with this great shot of the whales because that's what we're here for, to talk about them. And your research really inspires a lot of people and inspires the world to be a better place for these animals. I thank you so much for all that you do, and look forward to hearing about all kinds of extra fun new research that you're going to be doing in the future as well.
Great. Well, thanks for giving us the opportunity to tell people about it. So.
Betcha. So
look at that breach.
Whoa, nice.
Yay!
That's a nice way to-
See, they are. They're doing it. I'm cueing them.
They're
Didn't
right
you know
on.
they have an earbud in their ears?
Well, it's important for people to
great.
know that when whales are around them, they really shouldn't be moving their boats. They
Right.
want to stay as still as possible,
Yay.
because when you're moving, you're more vulnerable. So even if they come close, you probably should just leave your boat out of gear and let them move away instead of doing a whole lot of maneuvering.
Yeah. Wow, look at that. So, hey, Matt, are you out there?
Kate, we've just been treated to an amazing show. Not only those breaches you saw, but we saw the lobtailing behavior that Dave mentioned. They were blowing bubble clouds and then coming up and slapping their flukes. Amazing.
Oh, well, I couldn't have cued him any better. So, or her any better. So, gentlemen, thanks again for being in studio with us. And that wraps up another episode of Whaling to Watching series on Oceans Live. Thanks once again to the Mystic Seaport, and to our hosts here at the Pilgrim Monument and Provincetown Museum, and all our partners also who have helped make this show possible. We'll be back at 2 p.m. Eastern with a show about the historic ships of the 38th voyage, the shipwrecks around our National Marine Sanctuary system, and the lessons we can learn from our maritime past. I'm Kate Thompson with NOAA's Office of National Marine Sanctuaries, and we will see you then.
The skin is made of the softest oils. Does this make me a factory? No fins that take me through the sea. Bounty of a royal man that's trying to get the best of me on his whaling vessel. The skin is made of the softest oils, destined for the big city. My tail is a gray Oregon.